Shalom. This week we're reading Parshat Bo. Tell me, are you afraid of the dark? Now, if so, you are not alone. Although if you are afraid of being alone, you may be suffering from autophobia. Now, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, 11% of the American population suffers from acluophobia, or scotophobia, or myctophobia, various forms of being afraid of the dark. The fear of the dark is a common fear or phobia among children to a varying degree, and adults. Fear of the dark is usually not fear of darkness itself, but fear of possible or imagined dangers concealed by the darkness. Some degree of the fear of the darkness is natural, so you could relax, especially as a phase of child development. Most observers report that fear of the dark seldom appears before the age of 2 years. When fear of the dark reaches a degree that it is severe enough to be considered pathological, that's when it's called either acluophobia, or nyctophobia, or scotophobia, or even ligophobia. Some researchers, beginning with Sigmund Freud, consider the fear of the darkness as a manifestation of separation anxiety disorder. In fact, Sigmund Freud, writing back in 1916, in his Vorlesungen zur Einführung in die Psychoanalysis, which you would know as Introduction to Psychoanalysis, he writes, and I quote, "I once heard a child who was afraid of the darkness call out, 'Auntie, talk to me, I'm frightened.' To which the aunt responded, 'But what good will that do? You can't see me.' To which the child replied, 'If someone talks, it gets lighter.'" Now, the number of Americans who have a diagnosed phobia is a whopping 6.3 million. If you're amongst them, I'm afraid that this message may not be for you. Some of the more common phobias, of course, are fear of public speaking, glossophobia. I definitely have that one. 74% of the United States population, for example, suffers from that. Then there's claustrophobia, which is fear of confined places, and fear of heights, aquaphobia. Then there are some really less common phobias like fear of bald people, which is pilotophobia. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of phylacrophobia, which is the fear of becoming bald. Then there is omphallophobia, which is the fear of belly buttons, and even linonophobia, which is a fear of string. In Parshat Va'era, and now in Parshat Bo, we learn about the plagues that Hashem brought upon Pharaoh and the Egyptians. How much do you think that fear played a decisive role in this psychodrama? The plagues certainly should have caused, for example, hemophobia, fear of blood, or batrachophobia, fear of frogs, or even agrizophobia, fear of wild animals. In fact, I'm surprised that all of Egypt wasn't diagnosed with dementophobia, fear of going insane, just from seeing what was going on around them. But Pharaoh dug in, and his hardened heart reached the point of no return. Now, back in Parshat Va'era, Pharaoh's sorcerers were obviously beginning to manifest some pediculophobia, which is fear of lice, or actually sometimes called phitriophobia, as they declared to Pharaoh, "It is the finger of God." But once again, he hardened his heart. But when it came to the plague of hail, that's when Pharaoh seemed to finally be getting it, and perhaps ready to change, ready to do tshuva. Why hail? Great Rabbi Yochanan, great Talmudic sage, tells us that the hail consisted of both fire and ice. In fact, he taught that the bottom 3 tfachim, the bottom 3 handbreadths, were ice, and the top 3 handbreadths were fire. So an Egyptian would sit down, would get stung by the ice. He would stand up and be burned with fire. He must have really appreciated Robert Frost, the great poet laureate of New England, whose classic poem, Fire and Ice, reads simply, "Some say the world would end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice." Actually, it was when Paro saw that fire and ice were working together and indeed waging war against him, that they weren't extinguishing each other, that he acknowledged and admitted to Hashem's attribute of justice, saying, "This time I have sinned, and Hashem is the righteous one, and I and my people have sinned." But of course, it is well known and daily demonstratable, the ways of the wicked is that all the while that they're having troubles and having difficulties, they humble themselves. But as soon as the trouble passes, they go right back to their wicked ways. So as long as the hail was terrifying him, he said, "Hashem is the tzaddik." But once it passed, he refused once again to release Israel. As Parashat Bo arrives this week, we can't imagine that acridophobia wasn't settling in a big way. That's fear of locusts. The first plague of this last set of 3 locusts, as we learned about last week, the sets of 3. This is now the beginning of the end. And this was really the beginning of darkness, because an easterly wind blew the whole day and the whole night, and come morning, the locusts came and covered the entire land. They blotted out the sun. They consumed everything, not only the little bit of vegetation that had been left over from the hail. They destroyed homes. They entered their orifices. They gouged out their eyes. And this quite unseen army of Hashem, his personal troops, they hide dormant until summoned, living by his word alone. As the verse in Joel states, the abundant locust, the chewing locust, and the demolishing locust, my great army. What was left after locusts? We began by speaking about darkness. And what did we say? That the fear of darkness is usually not fear of darkness itself, but the fear of possible or imagined dangers concealed by darkness. What's there? Nothing. How many times do we try to comfort a child who is terrified of the dark by reminding him or her that just because the light's not on doesn't mean there's anything to be afraid of. There's nothing there. It's just dark. And darkness is nothing. And nothing is nothing and not something to be afraid of. Yet famously, when it comes to the plague of darkness, we learn that this was not a lack of light. This was something. It was stuff. It was palpable, tangible, not just a lack of light. What was this material? What was this darkness? The secret that our sages teach is that this was heavenly darkness. They say that it really wasn't darkness at all. In fact, it was light. It was the brightest light. It was only that the Egyptians, who had no vessels, that is to say, no capacity to perceive and to process this light, they perceived it as darkness. But as the Torah testifies, Israel, who were able to receive this light through their devotion to Hashem, through their Torah, but for all of the children of Israel, there was light in their dwellings. But it was the same thing. It was the same light. And as the Kotzker Rebbe explained, in the plague of darkness, Hashem's statement of creation, "Let there be light," was realized for Israel. Because we learn that this original hidden light of creation was hidden away because of the wicked. Hashem saw that they would abuse it, and he didn't want them to benefit from it. This light itself is the light of Hashem's love and kindness by which he created the world. But the wicked abuse it, they manipulate it, they use it for their own purposes, and this must be why, wherever they were, the Midrash teaches us, Egyptians who happened to be abroad on vacation or were out of Egypt, wherever they happened to be, they were in darkness. But children of Israel who came into the presence of the Egyptians, even into their homes, they had lights. This process goes on forever, our sages tell us. Whenever there is a reflection of this light in the world, the wicked are denied the opportunity to see it. They're only given darkness, and that is the idea that it was heavenly darkness, that it was this light that was created on the first day, which brings darkness to the wicked. So, this tangible, palpable darkness that our sages tell us about, it's it's a something. It's not just how we would normally consider darkness, the lack of light. But what is that something? The light of Hashem's kindness and love by which He created the world, by which He brought forth all creation, and of course, the centerpiece, the purpose of His creation, man. That something is our own potential to take our place in Hashem's creation as His centerpiece, as His creatures. So maybe what the Egyptians were suffering from wasn't fear of the dark, but a type of tachyphobia, or rather kakarahabthiophobia, which is fear of failure, fear of not living up to the potential that we all have, of a person overcoming obstacles, overcoming our own negative attributes, and becoming the people that we could be. Because this was what the reality that was manifest in the light that was shined on Egypt, that light which became darkness. It led to the slaying of the firstborn. What a scene that was. Every house had a manifestation of death. Every house, even that didn't have a firstborn, the oldest was considered the firstborn. The next in line, even the firstborn, the Midrash tells us, that had already passed away, their bones were dug up by the dogs, and they were dragged through the streets. As God tells us in the beginning of this parsha, I made a mockery out of Egypt. Everything that they knew became mocked. Hashem was playing with them because of their lack of fulfilling that potential. And the sages tell us regarding every one of the 10 plagues that something of them is left over. There's a little bit of darkness, a little bit of hail suspended in heaven, a little bit left of the slaying of the firstborn. That every single one of these plagues, there's a bit more on reserve for Edom in the future, to be visited upon those nations that refuse to see in that light of creation and overcome the obstacles and become part of Hashem's creation in the future, the time of the final redemption. So the study of these phobias, and there are hundreds, we've only mentioned a few. There's one which really could be said to be the summation of the whole experience of the 10 plagues. And that would have to be epistemophobia, which is the fear of knowledge. Because Hashem's process of redemption was so focused on bringing to the forefront of the consciousness of the people of Egypt the true revelation of His sovereignty and the need for humanity to recognize that. And time after time again, instead of being able to come to that point which requires that humility and that acknowledgement of Hashem's mastery, they hardened their hearts, led by Pharaoh, fear of the knowledge of the reality of Hashem, fear of becoming what they really could become, because it's so much easier to stay in this mindset of denial. And one thing, and the main thing, that this experience brought to the whole world, so that it became like the hallmark and the cornerstone of Hashem's revelation in the world, the Exodus from Egypt, the manifestation of the only real knowledge, the only real purpose of existence, which is the understanding of Hashem in the world that leads us to a desire to become the people that we all could be.